So, have you ever been taken advantage of? Have you ever had the wool pulled over your eyes? Have you ever been shystered? Have you ever been duped? Have you ever been hoodwinked, swindled? Have you ever been bamboozled? Now, chances are, all of us in this room, at some point, something happened where you go, I got the raw end of that deal. I'll share with this story. I'm 8 years old. I'm going to date myself a little bit. I'm 8 years old. Every Saturday morning, there was a group of kids that lived in our neighborhood. If we were not signed up and playing baseball at the time or football at the time, on the occasional Saturday morning where it was kind of free, we would have a chance to, as a group, get on our bikes, ride about 6 miles to the local liquor store. Now, I don't know if this is a California thing, but let me just unpack that real quick. This is before CVS and Walgreens and those kind of things. So you could walk in, it'd be a liquor store. It wasn't just the liquor and the booze that they had in the back. It was, they would have games, they would have ice cream, they would have sodas, they would have candy, they would have like all that kind of stuff. Obviously, that was the section that we went to at 8 years old. So we go there, and again, I'm going to date myself. I would get $1 from my dad. $1. And I could leave that store with a bag full of candy, gum, candy bars, a soda, and oftentimes a handful of baseball card packages. Now, I collected a lot of baseball cards through a series of a handful of years, and in the process of doing so, something that you would do from time to time with your buddies is that you would trade cards. It was kind of like you were a mini general manager. And so every once in a while, you'd sit down with a buddy, and he'd say, hey, I want this, and you'd be like, hey, that sounds like a good deal. Or, I want this, and he'd be like, hey, that sounds like a good deal. Or maybe it doesn't. But nonetheless, this one time, again, I'm 8, I sit down with a buddy of mine, and he's eyeing my Pete Rose all-star baseball card, okay? Now, at the time, Pete Rose is not the all-time hits leader in Major League Baseball. He's just a player, a good player. And I'm thinking, okay, I mean, Pete Rose is good. I like this. What do you got? And he goes, I have a Stan the Man card. Now, for those of you that follow baseball, you know Stan the Man, Stan Musial, one of the greatest hitters of all time, played for the Red Sox for years. Now, again, because I'm 8, and I really don't know that, I know the name Stan the Man, but I'm not able to connect the dots. So he's like, I got this card, let's trade. I say, no problem. So I give him my Pete Rose card, my all-star Pete Rose card. He gives me back Stan Wall. Now, I'm guessing nobody in this room has ever heard of this dude. Because I looked at the back of his card this morning. He played in places like Albuquerque, and okay, so I didn't know any better, right? I go home and I tell my brother, my older brother, dude, I just got a Stan the Man card. And he looks at it and he's like, what? He goes, dude, that ain't Stan the Man. So my brother gets up, goes, give me that, takes the card, leaves the house, comes back a few minutes later. He's got my Pete Rose card in his hand, a Carl Yastrzemski card, and he kept the Stan Wall card. So, what the enemy meant for evil, my brother turned around and used for good. Now, why do I tell you that story? I was deceived. I was duped. I didn't know any better. Every single one of us, at some point in life, we've been through that. And we're going to take a look at a section today where we're going to see that unfold. We're going to see, church, listen, if you're fairly new to the scriptures, if you're fairly new to the Bible, we're going to see a side of Jesus that many of you are going, oh, I've never seen that before. Like, is that okay? And so here we are, verse 13. Before we jump into that, let me just quickly kind of unpack where we have been, because it was a couple of weeks since we were in the first part of John chapter 2. John chapter 2, first part, we were at a wedding. It was a wedding of a no-name couple, a smaller wedding. What we would say is maybe an insignificant couple gets married, yet none other than Jesus himself is invited to this wedding, and this is where Jesus decides to unveil himself as the Messiah of the world, as the Savior of the world. Albeit on a small, kind of more private level, but nonetheless a public place where Jesus decides, I'm going to do my very first miracle. And so he turns water into wine, and by doing so, blesses a young couple. Now we're going to see the scene shift. This is no longer a private little, quiet little wedding. Jesus is about to go public in who he is, in front of the masses. And there's no larger gathering than we're going to see right here as we pick it up in verse 13. It says, now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, I don't have time today to unpack all of what the Passover is. Again, if you're fairly new to your faith, fairly new to the scriptures, I would encourage you, take some time over the next week, read Exodus 12 in detail, in depth. Read it a couple times. And you're going to see where God implements the Passover. I'm going to share with you kind of the 30,000-foot view, if you will, because it's very important to our text and where we are today. The Passover was where God had spoken to Moses and said to Moses, Moses, you go to the nation of Israel and you let them know I see their sin. Their sin is horrific in my eyes. It is defiling in my eyes. It is base in my eyes. And because of this sin that they continue to commit, that I continue to try to reason with them, I continue to try to reach them, and they're not listening. So here's what has to happen. Judgment has to come, Moses. And so I'm going to implement a process, a festival, an event. It's called Passover. Passover is where a man would take a lamb, an ox, something, shed the blood of that. He would take that, supposed innocent blood, because it's a harmless animal that hasn't hurt or harmed anybody. Take that blood, you put it on the doorposts and the lintel of the door of your home, and you mark the outside. And when the angel of death, the angel of judgment comes, when he sees that blood on the outside of your house, he will then pass over your house, and that is an implication of, God's grace in your life. I see the shedding of blood, and so I'm going to pass over your house. You are spared from the angel of death, and you are going to get to live. Now consider this for a moment. Jesus has just now gone to the Passover, okay? This whole event, this whole festival is all about him. But nobody knows that at this point. There are roughly 2 million people that are going to journey from all over Israel, all over Judah, and they're going to come to Jerusalem because that's where they celebrated the Passover. Jesus shows up there. None of them know that it's all about him. He more or less is the host of the event. I'll explain it to you this way. So yesterday, we had a birthday party at my house for my munchkin who just turned 13. 13. Okay, I have a teenager. My baby's a teenager now. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around this. So yesterday in my home, okay, I have an alligator in my living room. Okay, a boa, a python? Where's my daughter? Python, thank you very much. That's my girl right there. That's my 13-year-old. Now you're going, what happened? My wife scheduled a company to come, and they have all of these exotic animals. So all these things are literally in my living room. And if you know me, you know how much I love snakes. So anyway, all these kids, they all come and gather at my house. Why? Because my daughter is the host, right? It's her birthday. They're all there to celebrate her. And so here's Jesus. He goes to Jerusalem, to the Passover. He is more or less the host. It's all about him, but nobody else knows. A couple of million people gathering together for a high holy day to acknowledge this is how we represent, or our sins that are forgiven are represented. So Jesus goes to the Passover. He goes to Jerusalem, verse 14, and he found in the temple those who sold oxen, sheep, doves, and money changers. Listen, doing business. Doing business. Now, it wasn't necessarily unheard of, if you will, for people to go to the temple court and to be able to purchase an animal that could be slaughtered for the forgiveness of their sins. Think about it. You have people that are traveling, in some cases, tens and hundreds of miles to Jerusalem for the Passover. They're not going to bring with them some animal that they're going to carry the entire way just to slaughter. So there would be animals available for purchase. Now, I got a picture I want to show you real quick, just to give you a little bit of context of kind of where we are in our time here. Can you guys see over here? You guys good? Okay. So I'm going to use my trusty little pointer here because I rarely get to use it. So here we have, it's a very basic picture of Herod's temple, okay? Didn't get into all the elaborate detail in regards to the main temple, but I wanted to be able to show just what we know as the different courts of the temple and why it's important. Notice right here, this is called the Gentiles' court, okay? This right here is the area where anybody could gather. Jew, Greek, Gentile, it didn't matter. This was more or less kind of the outskirts of the temple, so to speak, if you will, because don't forget, Gentiles were considered dogs in the Jews' eyes. They were considered like, the low of the low. And so this was where everybody could gather, no problem, no issues. You go in a little bit further, now we have the court of women, okay? All Jews could gather in here, including Jewish women. If you were a Greek, a Gentile, you were not allowed to come in here. You had to stay out here. But the Jewish women could go in here. Now we get a little bit further. This is the court of Israel. This is where all men can go. Ladies, you need to stay out here in the court of women. But the men could go in here, the Jewish men. Now you go a little bit further. We have the main temple, and this is the high holy place, or the Holy of Holies, and that is where the priests go together. Now, why do I take time to break all that down? Because what we see happening in where we are in the passage right now is we are in this outer area right here. This is where Jesus is going to start to take issue with some of what we just read was the doing business, so to speak, within the court of the temple. So we have, every single week here, we have new families that come. They come and they want to know, like, who are you guys, and how do I get signed up, and how do I get involved, and how do I get plugged in? And whether it's myself or any one of our leaders, we, from time to time throughout the course of a Sunday, will answer a series of questions. And one of the questions that I get often is this: how do I give here? How do I give? So we'll always go through kind of the explanation of how we feel we want to accept gifts and tithes and offerings if you choose to support what's happening here at Town Center Church. First of all, we've got 2 tithe boxes in the back. If you are old school and you still believe in cash and money and you want to give that way, by all means you can. But here's what I would tell you. Never in this church are we going to pass a bucket. Never are we going to have somebody stand right here in the corner, some big burly dude, and give you the stink eye and wait for you to drop something in the tithe box as it goes back and forth. We're just not going to do that. Why? Because we don't believe that's the way to do it. It's not a matter of us guilting you or convincing you that you need to give. It's not that. It's between you and God. If God stirs in your heart to give to this ministry, praise the Lord. So here's what we say. We won't take an offering, but we'll receive an offering. Right? If you go, man, I love what you guys are doing. I love what's happening here. I want to support this. Praise God. Why do I share that? Because there are people outside of these 4 walls that think that we're just a business. Right? They think we gather on a Sunday morning. They think that, we all drive fancy cars, and maybe some of us pastors got a plane somewhere. Now, listen, you laugh, okay? I'll never forget a conversation I had with my mother-in-law probably 12 years ago, maybe. She had just moved here from Las Vegas. We were sitting in our living room, and she said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." She said, "The church that we were going to, from time to time, it was a great church, loved it, worship was great, everything was great, but from time to time, there would be a special offering." And she goes, I just couldn't wrap my mind around it. I couldn't decipher, like, is that okay? Is that good? And so she kind of explained one of the scenarios to me. And on one hand, I'm laughing, and on the other hand, my heart's breaking. Here was the scenario. So typically on a Sunday morning at this church, the worship team would get up, they would lead in song, and then an elder of some kind would get up and share announcements and, hey, what's happening in the church and all that kind of stuff. And then the pastor would get up and teach. And during the course of him sharing announcements, they would do the tithe offering. I'm not anti that. Churches pass buckets all the time. I'm totally fine with that. We just choose not to do it here. It's our own personal conviction. But other churches, that's okay. So they would do that. This one particular Sunday, the gentleman got up and he said, "Church, listen, we have a special offering today because pastor's wife's Mercedes is getting old. So we need to dig deep, and we need to get her a new Mercedes." Now, again, part of me, we kind of giggle and we laugh a little bit. But guys, listen. There are some very, very sincere, well-meaning people that are a part of churches like that, and they hear that and they go, "That must be God. I have to empty my pot. I have to give all that I can. And I hear stuff like that, and I go, wait a minute. I'll give you another example. I read an article this past week. There's a church in Mexico, a pastor who is selling plots of land in heaven. Now again, right, we laugh, we go, oh my, how foolish. There are people that are going to walk into that church and go, honey, we can buy a place in heaven. Where's the checkbook? So you look, Jesus walks into the temple. He's in the outer court, and he sees this happening, and I can't help but think, church, that there is a part of him that just is frustrated, is angry, is heartbroken over what he sees happening within the church. Why? Because there are men like me that are doing business and they're taking advantage of the people. So, again, people could bring in their own offering, and that was okay, right? But the Jewish leaders, oftentimes, here's what they would do. They would say, oh, we need to inspect your offering. So they bring the offering in, and then they look at it and they go, oh, see that right there? That's a little flaw. This is not a flawless lamb. This is not flawless sheep. This won't work. You cannot sacrifice this. But for the low price of $19.99, you can purchase your own. And so what was happening? People that were coming, that were oftentimes not people of means at all, were coming with a pure heart because they wanted to worship and they were being taken advantage of. You could see Jesus ain't down with that. Oh, he looks on. Notice what it says. He found in the temple those who sold oxen, sheep, doves, and money changers. Here's another interesting thing, right? So if somebody traveled and they didn't have the ability to bring their offering, here's what they would do. They would come with money and they would buy one there. So again, it wasn't uncommon that happened, but here's what they would do. If someone came in and they said, hey, I've got this money and I want to buy an offering for my family so that we can worship, they would look and they would go, oh, sorry, your money's no good here because it's got an inscription on it or someone's face on it that is pagan, and so we can't accept that. But here's what you can do. You can exchange it for our money that now you can go ahead and you can purchase an animal. And so people coming in very well-meaning, a heart in a right place that wanted to worship, and Jesus is watching this, and he's not okay with it. Verse 15. And when he had made a whip of cords. Now, I want to pause right there if I can, because there's something, church, that we need to grasp and we need to understand. Every single one of us in this room, myself included, we are moved by emotion. Okay, we just are. There's going to be moments where emotion moves you. And I'll give you an example. Yesterday, praying over my 13-year-old daughter in front of her friends, I start to get a little emotional. Why? This is my baby girl, and she's 13. And it's been said, right? The days are long and the years are short. Right? So if you're a parent here, you know that. And there are moments where, right, you get moved by stuff like that. Jesus, I think, is getting moved by emotion. Here's the thing, though. The difference is sometimes our emotion moves us to do something that is ungodly. That is not the case here. Jesus is painstakingly taking his time to make a whip of cords. This is not a quick process. He's taken his time to do it. What does that tell us? It tells us this. He doesn't just rise up and get angry and march in there and all of a sudden do something that we're going to look at in a moment. No, he's taking his time because there's something that is very, very unsettled in his spirit. I want to share a couple of verses with you that I think are just important, and then I want to share an illustration. And again, we, as human beings, the best that we can do, I think that we struggle from time to time with understanding how do we manage this emotion of anger? Because every one of us are going to get angry from time to time. And again, I'll give you an example in a moment. The Bible puts it this way in Ephesians 4:26, be angry and do not sin. Right, so some of you right now, you're hearing that for the first time and you're going, wait a minute, it's actually okay to get angry? Yes, it is. Why? Church, listen, we are created in the image of God, are we not? right? So we are created in the image of God. We're also created in the likeness of God. And so we are like him to a degree, certainly a sin-filled, fallen nature of who he is, but created in the likeness of him. So what happens when, from time to time, you see something that just upsets you and makes you frustrated? And you start to feel this thing rise up inside of you, and you go, I see something that's wrong, and I feel like that wrong needs to be righted, right? So God is sovereign. God is holy. God is mighty. He's merciful. He's gracious. But church, listen, he's also just. Right? And so when he sees something that is wrong that needs to be righted, when you and I experience something that is wrong that needs to be righted, I believe there is a righteous anger that can lead to a righteous justice. And I'll give you an example. And I pray that, because this is a delicate one, so I pray that as I share this, it comes across right. So hear my heart on this. Just hear me out. I'm going to share a topic that I know is going to be delicate and sensitive, and it's this. It's the border. Okay? Now some of you right now are going, here we go. One of the things I absolutely love about this country is that anybody can come here and they can live the American dream and they can work hard and God can bless them and whatever that looks like. Love that. In many cases, that's not what we see happening right now at our border. So let me share a couple thoughts. Right now, we have drugs that are pouring across our border. Okay, I don't know if you know this. There is more fentanyl in this country as I stand here and speak. It can kill everybody in the entire world. Okay, that is a fact. I don't know if you guys are aware of that. 7 billion people on this planet. There's more fentanyl right now in the United States that can wipe out the entire population of this world. Something wrong with that. Not only that, it's the fact that we know it's coming in. And not only that, we know where it's coming in. Now, why do I get passionate? Because I have done memorial services for some of your kids that have overdosed because of this. It is personal. And when you watch this happen and you're going, it is solvable, it is fixable, but we have people in a position that are turning a blind eye. Why? I have no idea. I'll share with you another one. Human trafficking. Maybe it's because I have 2 daughters. Maybe it's because my house is just filled with estrogen at all times. My mother-in-law stays over a lot. I love it, but when I think about women and children getting sold into sex trafficking and human trafficking, church, it just does something inside of me. And I go, well, why isn't that being dealt with? Where does that come from? I believe it's a just thing that God puts in our hearts so that when we see something that is wrong, we go, no, we can't let that happen. We need to do something about it, which leads to my first announcement. We can. Okay, we live in a country, church, listen, where we can all vote. Right? We've been given one of the most precious things in the world, and that is that we can elect people who we want to represent our values and what we believe in. Okay, it's rarely do you see that anywhere else in the world. I heard the statistic the other day, and I still try to wrap my mind around it. 40 million evangelicals are not registered to vote. 40 million. So here's my question to you. What would our country and what do you think this world would look like if we had people that voted this? Do you think things would look a little bit different? Okay. Well, for that reason, after service, if you are not registered to vote, would you please stop by a table that we've set up out in the hallway? That we have. A gentleman named John, a couple, John and Yvonne Vasquez, they're going to be at the table, very passionate about this, and just knowing that it's something, and for the next several months, we're going to do this. We're going to take a weekend a month in July, this week, obviously, August, September, October, and we're going to give people the opportunity, if you go, you know what, I've been sitting on the sidelines for a long time for me to get in the game. Please. So you can register to vote. That is our first announcement. Go see John after service, and he would be more than happy to get you plugged in. I was reading this the other day and I thought about it. I felt like it fits so perfect for where we are. Jesus says this in Matthew 5:25. It's the Sermon on the Mount. He says this, him speaking. But I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother, and here's the phrase, without a cause, shall be in danger of the council. So what does that imply? There is a cause to get angry. And so when you see things like that, you see things like what's happening here. Jesus walks into the temple. He starts to make a whip of cords. Now, again, some of you are going, I've never seen this side of Jesus before. The very thing that would be used to whip his body 39 times at his death, he is in the process of making. I struggled wrapping my mind around that, but I thought it was so incredible. So here he is. He walks in. He's making a whip of cords, and he drove them out of the temple with the sheep, the oxen, and he poured out the money changers' money, and he overturned the tables. Now, I thought about bringing up like one of those plastic tables up on stage here, and like a WWF, wrestler kind of thing. Okay, now, why do I take time to the tables that he more than likely flipped over are thick slabs of marble. Okay? More than likely weighing a couple, if not several hundred pounds. This is a scene that is unfolding right before our eyes. Jesus walks in. He sees them doing business. He starts to make a whip of cords. He drives them out. He flips over the tables that are in the courtyard because he's disturbed at what it is that he sees happening inside of the temple court or the outer court where all the Gentiles and everybody are gathering. So I kind of just, as I sit in my office and I study and I'm kind of thinking throughout the week, and I was sitting there the other day and I had this thought and I thought, what would Jesus do if he walked into some modern day churches? That thought is not lost on me for several reasons. You go, why? Because as pastors here, we're very thoughtful about the things that we put out in the hallway. Very thoughtful about things that we go, hey, church, we want you to know about this. We're over the course of the time and years, we have sold books for different, men's ministry or women's ministry, and we haven't marked them up. Because it's not about making money. That's not the purpose behind why we might have a table out in the hallway. The purpose of a table out in the hallway is information so that you can grow in your relationship with God. You can go deeper in your walk with Him. Everything that we want to promote is going to point to that. And that leads to my second announcement. So, coming up in a couple of weeks, I wanted to make you guys aware. I don't know if you're aware of an organization. It's got a couple of branches. One of them is a ministry branch, but it's called TPUSA. It's called Turning Point USA. Some of you are familiar. Okay, gentleman named Charlie Kirk. Now I want to be very cautious in how I go about this because never at this pulpit will we ever promote a man. The only man we're ever going to promote here is Jesus, okay? Now, with that said, there are men and women that are doing things in the name of the Lord, in the name of the gospel, that I look on and I go, that's something that I can get behind. For example, Charlie Kirk is a guy who goes straight into the belly of the beast. He goes straight into the lion's den. He goes to the college campuses, okay? He does. And he's going to go there and he's going to talk to these young, impressionable college students that a lot of them have bought into a lot of stuff that is just poison and garbage. Okay, they have. Now, if you after service go and YouTube him, more than likely you're going to see him get in some kind of a fiery debate with somebody. And the first thing you're going to ask is like, dude, this is the guy we promoted. Hear me out. I love the fact that he goes, I care enough about these kids, I'm going to go onto their college campus and I'm going to have try to have a reasonable conversation that is going to lead to them asking questions about my faith and why I do what I do. I think he has led more people to Jesus on the college campus than just about anybody. Don't get me wrong. There's some really good ministries on college campus today. Crew and some other. Love what they're doing. But here's an outside independent guy that walks onto the college campus and he goes, I'm going to look for somebody that I can have a conversation with and try to draw them into a relationship with God by debunking all the poison and garbage that they believed. I don't know many men that are doing that these days. So for that, I go, you know what? That's good. That's good. So this is called the Believers Summit. It's going to happen on July 26th through the 28th at the Convention Center up in West Palm Beach. If you go there, you're going to see me. I'm going to be there. I've been the last couple of years. It is phenomenal. Some really, really gifted and good speakers, and they're all there to promote the gospel and push it forward. If you're interested, we've got a bunch of these out in the hallway. You could stop by. You can grab them. We're not selling anything. It's just us saying, hey, if you want to be a part, great. Maybe we'll see you there. If you don't, that's fine too. But again, back to our text. I look at Jesus. He goes in and he starts flipping over tables because he is not happy with something that he sees happen. The people there are being taken advantage of. And he responds. In verse 16, he says, take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise. I asked you earlier to turn to Mark chapter 11. Would you please flip over there quickly? Mark 11, just to give you a little bit of backdrop on where we are and the story that we're about to read, it's going to come across very, very similar to where we are in John, okay? It's actually going to sound like the exact same story. Many scholars believe that it's not, for a couple of reasons. Number one, mainly, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which are the synoptic gospels, they put it at the end of their letters. John has it right here in the beginning. So most scholars believe two separate events, although they look very similar in some of the verbiage, but there is a couple things that Jesus says here that are a bit different. So if you would, Mark 11, verse 15. It says, so they came to Jerusalem, and then Jesus went into the temple and began to drive out those who bought and sold in the temple and overturned the tables and the money changers. Now, so far, sounds the same, but there's something added here that I think is significant. Notice what it says. He turned over the money changers and the seats of those who sold the doves. Who was sitting in the seats? It was the Jewish leaders. By him flipping over the seats and the tables, what was he saying? I'm undoing your authority. You are no longer allowed to sit in this seat. You've been sitting here for a long time. We're going to start making some changes. Flips over the tables, flips over the seats. We read on. Verse 16. And he would not allow anyone to carry wares, or another way to say goods, through the temple. So Jesus goes in, flips over the tables, flips over the seats, and then he starts going toward those that are actually walking around. Again, if you remember, I shared earlier, roughly 2 million people have sojourned to Jerusalem. There are multitudes and multitudes of people. There are no way that a few tables set up in the courtyard are going to be able to attract all the business that these guys are looking to do. So now they're going to send people out into the seats. How many of you guys go to Dolphin games? Literally, you guys, nobody goes. Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't raise my hand either, but no, I'm kidding. No. Easy. So if you don't go to the peanut stand or the beer stand, guess what? The beer stand's coming to you, right? That's kind of similar to what we see happening here. So they go out into the crowd, they're selling the wares, and this is where Jesus comments in verse 17. Then he taught them, saying, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations? This is where I want to pause for a minute. Consider what it is that Jesus just said, okay? He walks into the temple and he says, my house shall be called a house of prayer. That's what it's supposed to be called. Now, how does that apply to you and I today, church? So here we are. We're at the Marriott. We are in a banquet room inside the Marriott. Throughout the week, this is used for other events. Every single Sunday morning, we as a church, we gather. And what is this? This is God's house, right? Now, again, we don't meet here throughout the week. This is not our permanent home. But on Sunday mornings, we are here as a church. And while we are here, this is God's house. And what does he say? My house shall be called a house of prayer. Would you please pull this out? This is one of the very rare times that I will ever ask you to take your focus away from the word and focus on your phone. But I'm doing this for a reason. If you have a smartphone, you know it because it's smarter than you, and it controls your life. And in your phone, you should have an app that says clock. And I would ask you if you would open that up. And here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to turn to the part that says alarm. And you can actually set an alarm. And here's the request. Ready? If you've been with us from the beginning, you know where I'm going with this. If you're fairly new, you're going, okay, what are we doing? When we started to meet in the very beginning in March, we had 4 Sunday meetings where we met in here. We had a brief time in the Word, and the rest of the time we spent in prayer. And here's what we ask you to do. We asked you to pray every single day in the month of March for March 31st, which was our very first service, Easter Sunday. And what time did we ask you to pray? 3:31. Why? March 31st. So here's the request of you. If you are willing, would you set an alarm on your phone every single day at 3:31? And when that alarm goes off, would you do this? Would you pray? That's not very enthusiastic, church. My house shall be called a house of prayer. Why? Why do we ask you to do that? I read an article about a young lady. She's a Satanist. Not just someone's alarm's going off. I love it right there. My man's already on it. Not just a Satanist, church. Listen, a high priestess within the Satan cult. Okay, here was the article. She was being asked about why she is involved in this and why is it important to her and what does it mean to her and all that kind of stuff. And here's what she spoke with a venom toward Jesus and a venom toward the church and a venom towards Christianity. And quite honestly, guys, a venom toward you. And here was her thing. We are very strategic in what we do. And when we see a church, we start to put together a game plan for how we can go after that church. Starts with a pastor, then it goes to his wife, his kids, other pastors on staff, elders, leaders, and we strategically start thinking about how can we go after them and how can we take them out. She said, and most of the time we could be fairly successful with the exception of a handful of churches. And so naturally, the person asked, well, why could you not be successful in some of those other churches? And she said, because I knew the ones that prayed and the ones that didn't. And here's what she said. Again, this is her words. So I don't know. She said this. I had the ability to see into the spiritual realm. I could see angels. I could see demons. I could see wars and battles. She goes, I could see that it's a battle. It's a war zone. And it really got me to thinking, do we view it that way? Right? Do we as Christians and believers view the fact that as followers of Jesus, we're at war? I don't know that we do. I mean, thank you for saying yes, those of you that say yes. And I'm certainly not, I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think, again, the church as a whole, the church with a capital C, if we understood the realm and the depth of the spiritual attack that we would find ourselves in, I think we would handle it much, much different. So here's what she said. The churches that prayed, I couldn't go near them. She said, I could see in the spiritual realm, they were covered by a dome. And then she said this, and it was blue. Now, some of you are going, what is the significance of that? If you are, listen, if you're Jewish here, you know the colors of your flag and why they are the way they are. The white stands for God and holiness and purity. Blue stands for victory. So there is a blue dome that covers churches that pray. So here's my natural request of us, church. Can we be a church that prays that if someone looks on and they have ill intent toward us, they go, I ain't even bother going there. Here's my hope. At 3:31 every single day, that the gates of hell are rattled because Town Center Church goes, we're seeking God. Now, here's a cool little tidbit. This girl that was a Satanist, she's now a born-again believer and a follower of Jesus. So, love just how that story unfolds. But it just, it got me to thinking, so back to John chapter 2. So Jesus says, you've taken my Father's house. It's a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. Here we read, oh Lord, we're only in verse 16. Okay. Here we read that Jesus says, you've made it a house of merchandise. Now consider what the church is supposed to be. This is supposed to be a place where I don't care what your background is. I don't care what your belief system is. I don't care what your denomination is. I don't care anything about that. This is supposed to be a place when you darken those doors and you come in, that you are warmly welcomed, that you are greeted, you are loved, regardless of who you are and what you look like. Right? That is, in essence, what is supposed to happen within the church. That is not happening in the temple. And so Jesus looks on, and I found this interesting. You don't have to turn there. Listen to this. This is Matthew chapter 23, verses 37 and 38. This is Jesus at the end of his ministry. He's about to go to the cross. Okay, listen to what he says. He says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem." He's up on a mountain. He's overlooking Jerusalem. And he's crying out over this city with just a deep empathy and a deep compassion. It says, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets, stones those who were sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing." And in verse 38, he says this, "See," and there's an exclamation mark after it, so for homework, if you want to go look at it, you can. And then he says this, "Your house is left to you desolate." Now consider the transition that's just taken place. Jesus just told us, this is my house. This is my Father's house. Now he looks on at Jerusalem, and there's almost like this hands off. Like, I've tried, and I've tried. And you have continued to reject me. You have continued to shun me. You have continued to turn a blind eye to me. So guess what? It is now your house. Church, that is a very, very chilling thing to think about. In Revelation chapter 3, verse 20, and this is a passage that many pastors, and I certainly have from time to time, have used it in the context of, "Behold," Jesus speaking, "I stand at the door and I knock. And if anyone opens the door, I will come in and I will dine with him and he with me." I have used that in the context of God knocking on your heart. He desires a relationship with you. If you would open your heart, if you would open up and invite him inside, he's going to come in, he's going to change you forever. I've used that in that way. But the literal context of what it is that John is the picture he's painting, and what Jesus is saying in Revelation 3 is Jesus is outside the church knocking on the door going, "Would you guys let me in?" And you go, whoa, okay. A church that has pushed Jesus outside to the point where he's knocking on the door saying, "Hey, I'd like to actually come in there if you guys would open the door and let me in." So he says, "You've taken my Father's house and you've made it a house of," you're doing business. That's what really matters to you right now. And church, I just have to confess, I'm reading through this and I'm sensing this conviction. Certainly not that we've done that at all here, but just one of those things where you go, man, I never want to go there. Never want to allow anything like that to happen. We got to pick up the pace. Verse 17, "Then his disciples remembered that it was written, 'Zeal for your house has eaten me up.'" And that's Psalm 69:9, I believe it is. And at some point, the psalmist, David, writes this, and it's kind of a prophetic picture of what Jesus would, they're watching him, right? So again, they're seeing a side of Jesus they've never seen before. They just left a wedding. Celebrating, couple, got married, it's great. Jesus walks in, he starts flipping over tables, and they're like, whoa. And all of a sudden they go, "That's right. Remember we read, 'Zeal for your house has eaten me up.'" When you consider this, take it all the way out, all the way to its nth degree, church. Jesus would ultimately lay down his life and die on the cross for his people. Zeal has eaten me up. Verse 18. "So the Jews answered and they said to him, 'What sign do you show us since you do these things?' And Jesus answered and he said to them, 'Destroy this temple and in 3 days I will raise it up.' And the Jews said, 'It's taken 46 years to build this temple. You're going to raise it up in 3 days?' Now, consider this. Here they are. I kind of showed you a picture of the temple court and all that stuff. You can't, from that drawing, understand how elaborate this building is. Herod, again, I shared it earlier, when he built buildings, they were just, the detail, the intricacy, everything was so unbelievable. So naturally, as they are sitting here in the temple looking at this building and they're going, you're going to destroy this and you can rebuild this in 3 days? Now here's what they don't know. They just said it took 46 years for them to build this. What they don't know is that there's going to be another several decades, because from beginning to end, it took 84 years to build the temple. So now they're looking at this and they're going, 3 days? You can build this up? Verse 21. But he was speaking of the temple of his body. Therefore, when he had risen from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this to them, and they believed the scripture and the word which Jesus had said. I love that in the course of just a couple of verses, twice we have the disciples remembering something. Now, why is that important? Again, church, they didn't walk into the temple and have the guy stand up and guard, who needs a Bible? Right? That didn't happen. Why? Because they did not have the canon to go to. They didn't have the text to go to. They had the Torah, they had the Pentateuch, they had the first 5 books of the Bible, they had Isaiah. They didn't have an entire Bible where it was real time. It was being played out for them in real time. So I love the fact that there were moments where they were like, oh yeah, remember this? Church, listen, crucial for us to be a church, I believe, that remembers God's word. Listen to what David said in Psalm 119, verse 11. He said, Lord, I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. They remembered the scripture, they applied the scripture, and certainly it impacted their lives. And here's where we close it out, verse 23. Now, when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover during the feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs which he did, but Jesus did not commit himself to them because he knew all men and had no need that anyone should testify of men, for he knew what was in man. Now, as we close this time, it's kind of an interesting little transition into the last couple of verses. So you have these people that they see Jesus do some things and they're like, Jesus, we are all in. And he's like, no, you're really not. Because you're following me for the signs that I did, for the miracles that I performed, but you're really not following me because of who I am. So you look at the last sentence in the last part of the passage. He knew what was in men. Now, as I share that, everybody in this room, that either just thrills you and overjoys you, or it terrifies you, right? Because if you're somebody that understands that and you go, I know that God can see deep inside my heart and deep inside my soul. I know that he knows me better than I know myself. I'm aware of that, and so I try to live my life in such a way that I'm open and transparent before him, because there's nothing hidden from his eyes, right? Or right now you're hearing that and you're going, he knows everything? Like everything I think? Everything I feel? Everything? Yeah. And guess what? He loves you still. So we're going to close a little differently today, church, and I think it's very fitting and very appropriate that we conclude our time in communion. And so I'm going to close in prayer. I'm going to ask the fellas if they would get ready as we have a chance to pass out the elements, and then we'll all go to the Lord together. So pray with me if you would. Father, we